Hello again, my old friend. Tonight we follow the scent of gunpowder and ghosts across the wastes. This is the story of Cassian Vale, once a name whispered in fear, now a man searching for the truth they buried in his mind. They called him the Hound, a bounty hunter forged by Vault-Tech's darkest ambitions and set loose on a world that forgot what it owed him. With Juniper Ormond, a girl chasing the fragments of her stolen past, Cassian will trace his origins through shattered vaults, scorched deserts, and the echo of old sins. Together they'll confront the architects of memory and decide whether a man shaped by lies can ever reclaim his soul. So dim the lights, check your bearings, and settle in for the Hound. The bounty came sealed in an old-world envelope, parchment yellowed by time, the ink stamped in red that had long since faded to rust. Cassian Vale found it tucked beneath a half-empty bottle of rotgut at the bar in Barrow's End, the saloon half standing on the edge of what used to be Route 95. No signature, just coordinates, a brief description and one name, Elias Ormond. He didn't ask who had left it. In places like Barrow's End, questions like that got you either a lie or a bullet, and Valet didn't care much for either. He lit a match off the sole of his boot and burned the envelope once he'd committed the contents to memory. Then he ordered one last drink, packed his gear, and left before dawn's light could catch on the broken glass of the town's only window. Cassian Vale had gone by many names in his time. The locals called him Hound for reasons long forgotten, though maybe it was the color of his coat, bleached from sun and soot, more bone than brown, or maybe it was the way he tracked bounties across the wastes with a dog's silent patience. Some claimed he never slept, others swore he could smell guilt like blood in water. None of them were entirely wrong. The desert was waking up as he rode east, the air brittle and sharp, the horizon an iron smear of rising heat. His duster trailed behind him like a flag of surrender, though there wasn't a soul out there who'd take it. On his hip, a battered 10mm pistol sat in a custom holster worn to his shape. Strapped across his back was a sawed-off shotgun with the words "Bitter Truth" etched into the barrel. Cassian didn't speak much these days, and when he did, it was with the gravity of a man who'd learned early that words could kill just as cleanly as bullets. He preferred action to explanation, silence to small talk, not because he was cold, though the Wasteland had stripped plenty of warmth from him, but because he'd spent too long listening to liars, and he knew better than anyone what it meant to forget the truth. The bounty's trail began at sundown, a town that existed mostly in rumor and half-erased maps. Nestled in a dead basin where dust storms moved like waves, sundown was said to have no memory. People came through, but no one stayed long. Not because of bandits or radiation, but because something in the place made you forget why you came at all. Cassian wasn't the superstitious type, but he'd learned not to discount whispers entirely, not when enough of them sang the same tune. He reached the outskirts by mid-afternoon, the sun at his back and the winds carrying grit that scoured skin like steel wool. Sundown appeared without warning, as if he'd passed through an unseen veil. One moment it was desert, endless and empty. The next, buildings loomed in the haze, squat and sun-bleached, clustered around a skeletal water tower with "Hope" painted in flaking red letters. At the town's edge stood a rusted sign that read, "Welcome to Sundown, the place time forgot." Cassian dismounted and walked his bike behind a collapsed fence, his boots crunching on ground that cracked like brittle bones. The town was quiet, too quiet for midday. He passed a dry fountain choked with weeds and the remnants of a festival banner that might have once been colorful. At the saloon, more intact than most, he found the barkeep polishing glasses that hadn't seen liquor in weeks. The man looked up as Vale entered, eyes scanning the bounty hunter with a kind of recognition that didn't settle. He opened his mouth, paused, then frowned. "Do I know you?" he asked. Cassian shook his head. "Just passing through." The man nodded slowly as if trying to convince himself that was true. "Don't get many folks anymore. Not for long, anyway." "Looking for someone. Name's Elias Ormond." The barkeep blinked, gaze going distant. Then he scratched his temple and frowned. That might be familiar. He, maybe, came through last week. Or was it last month? Was he alone? Don't remember. Cassian studied the man's face, noting the twitch behind his eye, the way he gripped the edge of the bar like it anchored him to something. The barkeep's hands were trembling. Something wrong with this town? Cassian said. The man gave a hollow laugh. You've no idea. Days don't stick here. Names slip away. My own daughter stopped recognizing me last spring. Then she forgot she had a father at all. Cassian's jaw tightened. And you stay? Where would I go? The man said. This place is all I remember, even if it don't remember me. He slid a chipped glass across the counter, filled with nothing. If Ormond's here, he's not staying in town. We'd forget him too fast. Check the ridge. Used to be a way station out that way. Or maybe it was a lab. Hell, maybe I made it up. Cassian turned without another word, but as he stepped outside, a voice called after him. You're the Hound, aren't you? He paused. Thought you were dead. Cassian didn't reply. He mounted his bike and gunned the engine, the roar of it swallowing the wind. The road ahead was narrow and cracked, winding toward the distant ridge like a scar across the land. As the town disappeared behind him, the bounty hunter felt a familiar unease settle into his bones. Something was waiting at the end of this trail, something old and wrong and buried deep. He didn't remember taking this job for revenge. He didn't remember much at all these days, but he'd remember the end, one way or another. The ridge rose like a spine out of the land, its rocky flanks littered with twisted sage and the broken bones of pre-war highways. Cassian rode until the road turned to rubble and the engine began to whine against the incline. He killed the ignition and let the silence take over. In that stillness, you could hear the wasteland breathe. He continued on foot, the slope uneven beneath his boots. A lone buzzard circled high above, its cry sharp as flint against the dry wind. Far ahead, just past a crumbling gas station sign buried in dune sand, sat what remained of the way station. The structure looked half collapsed from the outside, its walls buckled in places and roof held aloft by sheer spite. Still, someone had taken the time to board the front entrance. Poorly. Someone who didn't plan on being followed. Cassian approached the boards and tested one with a boot. Dry wood cracked and splintered with ease. He stepped inside. The air was cooler in the shadows, the light from outside slanting through the broken roof in narrow beams. A tattered cot leaned against the wall, near a burned-out fire barrel. Someone had lived here recently, slept, maybe eaten, but not long ago. Dust hadn't had time to settle. He moved deeper, pistol drawn low in one hand. The backroom door hung half open. As he reached for it, a noise behind him stopped him cold, a soft scuff of gravel, the unmistakable sound of a footstep. He turned fast, gun raised. A girl stood in the doorway, backlit by the sun. She looked no older than 16, maybe 17, hair tied back in a frayed bandana, dust-caked clothes, patched in at least a dozen places. In one hand, a makeshift spear. In the other, a satchel that looked like it had once belonged to a courier. She didn't flinch, just raised an eyebrow. Your trigger's a little twitchy for someone poking around a ruin, she said. Cassian didn't lower the pistol. You following me? I was here first, she replied. You just didn't see me. He took a step forward. Name? Juniper, she said, without hesitation. And you're Cassian Vale, the Hound. Thought you'd be taller. The fact that she knew his name narrowed his options considerably. Either she was sent after him, or someone had been talking. Either way, she was dangerous, or clever. He wasn't sure which was worse. How long you been watching me? Since the bike stopped, she said. You're not subtle. I wasn't trying to be. He finally lowered the gun, but didn't holster it. You live here? She snorted. No one lives anywhere. I move, like everyone else. This place was quiet, so I stayed the night. Was about to leave when I heard you stomping up the ridge like a drunken Yagwai. Cassian scanned her face for signs of deceit. She didn't look afraid. That could mean she was lying, or that she was just stupid. But there was a spark in her eyes, a sharpness he recognized. He saw it in mirror shards and rear-view reflections. People who'd survived more than they should have. You hungry? He asked. Her face didn't change. Maybe. He reached into his coat and tossed her a can of preserved beans. She caught it mid-air, eyes flicking from label to latch. "No opener," she said. "You want teeth? Earn 'em." Juniper sat on the edge of the broken cot and worked the lid open with the end of her spear. Cassian leaned against the doorframe, watching her with the studied patience of a man who'd spent too many nights waiting for answers. "What do you know about Elias Orman?" She looked up, chewing slowly. "The name rings a bell. Scientist, right? Vault-Tech? You've seen him?" "Maybe. Depends. On what?" "On whether you let me come with you." Cassian's jaw tensed. "This isn't a sightseeing trip." "Didn't say it was. But if you're hunting someone that messed with minds, you're gonna need someone who hasn't lost theirs yet." "Place down the slope. Old substation. I saw someone matching Orman's photo a week ago. Creepy eyes, always mumbling. Came out after dark, carrying what looked like a holotape archive." "You sure it was him?" "I'm sure it wasn't a merchant." Cassian considered it. The Wasteland didn't offer many clean deals, and this one smelled better than most. She was a risk, but one that might already know the terrain. He didn't have time to scout alone, and Ormond was too far ahead already. "You ride." "Not well," she admitted, "but I can shoot." He nodded once. "We leave at dusk. Pack light." She stood and slung her satchel over her shoulder, grinning like she'd won a bet. "I already am." They left the ruin behind as the sun dipped below the ridgeline, casting the world in long shadows. Cassian led the way down a back trail, with Juniper jogging to keep pace beside the bike. They spoke little. The wind carried the sound of their footfalls away into the dust, leaving only the soft hum of a growing silence. Ahead, far across the valley, a single light blinked from the base of a collapsed radio tower. Cassian paused, adjusting the cracked scope on his rifle. A figure moved between the rubble, too smooth for a scaff, too slow for a rider. Juniper saw it too. "At him?" she asked. "Only one way to know." Cassian mounted the bike and kicked it into gear. The engine growled low like a predator waking up. Juniper climbed onto the rear frame, arms tightening around his coat. As they sped toward the signal, the girl leaned close enough to speak into his ear. "So, Hound, what are you going to do when you find him?" Cassian's eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. "Make him remember. The town was the kind you didn't find unless you were meant to." Sundown wasn't on any map Cassian had ever trusted, and the locals didn't give directions to strangers. It sat low in a basin of sand and time, a scattered heap of buildings stitched together by winding alleyways and faded signage from a pre-war life that had never truly ended, just repeated with more rot. Cassian and Juniper rolled in just after sunset. The horizon behind them still glowed faintly, a molten orange backdrop to the fading light. The motorcycle kicked up dust as it coasted to a stop near the town square, a sun-bleached statue of some forgotten war hero standing crooked in the center. Around it, the few remaining structures leaned inward like old conspirators. No one came to greet them. No one ever did. "Place feels wrong," Juniper said quietly. Cassian nodded. "That's because it is." They walked past a convenience store with boards over its windows and a gas station that hadn't pumped anything but sand in 50 years. What few townsfolk they glimpsed moved like sleepwalkers, their expressions loose, almost dazed. A woman, sweeping her porch, paused mid-measure, eyes tracking them like a memory trying to take root. When Cassian met her gaze, she flinched and turned away. He led Juniper to the local inn, or what passed for one. It used to be a motor lodge, now a half-collapsed affair with sagging beams and a crooked neon sign that still flickered vacant in tired red letters. Inside, a desk clerk greeted them with a hollow smile. He was an older man, but clean, with silver hair combed back in neat lines. His name tag read Douglas, though it looked freshly pinned, like he'd just remembered he had a name. "Evening," he said. "Looking for a room?" Cassian nodded. "2. Payments up front, caps or trade." Cassian handed over a pouch. Douglas accepted it without counting, as though the ritual mattered more than the amount. He handed them 2 keys, both attached to identical splinters of polished wood. "Breakfasts when you remember to ask," he said, then added as an afterthought, "Welcome to sundown." Their rooms were side by side. Cassian's was mostly intact, bare mattress, cracked sink, a vent that rattled every few seconds like it was trying to breathe. He dropped his gear, checked the locks, and sat on the bed. Juniper leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You believe what they say about this place?" she asked. "That it forgets itself?" She nodded. "I've been here before," Cassian said quietly. "Long time ago." She tilted her head. "Remember anything?" "No." She opened her mouth to ask more, then thought better of it. "I'm going to look around. Stay close." She gave a lazy salute and disappeared down the hall. Cassian lay back, eyes tracing the stains on the ceiling. Something about sundown itched at the edge of his mind. He remembered a mission here, long ago. A woman with pale eyes. A deal made under duress. But the details slipped through like water through mesh. He closed his eyes for just a second. When he opened them again, the room had changed. The vent was silent. The mattress felt warmer. The door, he could swear, was on the opposite wall. He sat up fast, gun drawn, but everything looked the same. Just off, familiar, but incorrectly so. A knock at the door made him rise. He opened it to find Douglas, the clerk, holding a yellowed file folder. "This came for you," Douglas said. "I didn't leave a name." Douglas smiled thinly. "Things find their way in sundown." Cassian took the folder. As he opened it, Douglas added, "Be careful. Some memories are borrowed, some are implanted." Then he walked away, humming a tune that might have been patriotic if it hadn't sounded so tired. Inside the folder were photographs, blurry stills taken from an old security camera. Cassian recognized himself in the frame, talking to someone whose face was just out of view. The timestamp was 12 years ago. Cassian hadn't even known sundown existed 12 years ago. He stared at the images, then at the name scribbled in the corner of the last one. E. Orman. Juniper returned an hour later with dirt on her boots and suspicion in her voice. "Locals won't talk, keep circling their own stories like they're stuck in a loop. Same questions, same answers. It's like they're reading off cue cards." Cassian handed her the folder. She flipped through the images, frowning. "This is you, apparently. Who's the guy you're talking to?" "Ormond." She lowered the photos. "You're saying you've met him?" "I'm saying I don't remember, and I don't like that." Outside, a sudden clang rang through the square. Metal striking metal, harsh and unplanned. Cassian grabbed his shotgun, Juniper her pistol. They moved to the window. Near the statue in the square, a figure was stumbling away from a toppled cart. A young man, barefoot, wild-eyed, muttering to himself. He looked around in terror, then ran toward the outskirts. Cassian was already moving. "Come on!" They followed the trail out of town, dust kicking up behind them. The man had dropped something in his panic, a rusted holotape player, still running. Cassian hit stop and rewound it. A voice played through, soft and desperate. "If you're hearing this, they're not real. None of them are real. Sundown's a facade. They built it over the original site, over Vault 49. Don't trust anyone, and for God's sake, don't go underground." The tape clicked off. Juniper looked at Cassian, eyes wide. "Vault 49? Cassian stared at the horizon, where the man had vanished into the dust. "He's leading us there." Juniper hesitated. "That's where Ormond went, isn't it?" Cassian's grip tightened on the shotgun. "Yeah, and we're going to make sure he never comes back." The trail was still warm. Cassian moved quickly, with Juniper close behind. The holotape player clipped to her belt, replaying static now, as if the message had erased itself after one listen. The landscape changed fast outside of sundown. Dunes grew taller, the air thicker with heat and tension. They followed the path for an hour before the tracks disappeared over a ridge of wind-blown gravel. Cassian crouched low, brushing his fingers through the disturbed dust. He was running blind. Juniper nodded. "Probably didn't make it far." They crested the ridge, and that's when Cassian saw them. 4 figures in black leathers, rifles slung lazy across their shoulders, moving through the scrub like wolves circling prey. One had a red scarf over his mouth. Another had what looked like a bone charm tied into his braid. Painted dogs. Cassian froze. "Down!" Juniper dropped beside him, eyes wide. "Who are they?" "Old pack," he said, scanning for cover. "Bounty hunters. Ruthless. Territorial." "You used to run with them." "Briefly." His voice was flat. "Until they figured out I had something called a conscience." Juniper unslung her pistol. They're looking for Ormond too? No, Cassian said, already sliding behind a crumbling outcrop. They're looking for me. They didn't have long to wait. The dogs moved with purpose, fanning out with practiced ease. One took a wide loop, circling toward the ridge. Cassian cursed under his breath. You said they were bounty hunters. You think there's a price on your head? There's always a price, he muttered. Footsteps approached. Juniper tensed, but Cassian held up a hand. Wait. A shadow fell across the rocks. A voice called out, low and amused. Cassian Vale. Thought you died with the last contract you bailed on. Cassian stepped into view, slowly, hands out but his shotgun still on his back. Talk? The man who stepped forward wore a long duster stitched with mismatched badges, symbols of bounties claimed and rivals eliminated. His face was narrow, all angles, with one cybernetic eye that glowed faintly red. Talk smiled. I'll be damned. The Hound still breathing. Briefly, Cassius said. Talk chuckled. You ran out on us, Vale. Took a contract solo, left us to deal with the fallout. You mean the child you were going to ransom? She was worth good caps. And she was breathing, unlike her family. Cassian's voice was cold steel. That's why I left. Talk shook his head, mock disappointment in his tone. Always the bleeding heart. I told the boys you'd come crawling back one day. Guess I win the pool. What do you want? Turk glanced over his shoulder. The other dogs were watching from a distance, but they'd loosened their weapons. Not an ambush yet, but close. We're here for Ormond. Cassian's expression didn't change. He's mine. Talk raised a brow. That's not how bounties work. He's not a bounty. He's a loose end. Talk grinned, but there was no humor in it. Ah, personal. Cassian said nothing. Talk shrugged. Tell you what, we'll give you the usual offer. Walk away. Let us bag him. We won't gut the girl you picked up along the way. Juniper stepped out before Cassian could stop her. You're welcome to try. Talk laughed. Feisty. Cassian's voice cut through the air. You won't touch her. Talk sighed. Still protecting strays. Haven't changed a bit, Vale. Cassian moved first. The shotgun came off his back in a single motion, and the first round tore through the dirt near Talk's feet. Not a kill shot, just a warning. The painted dogs tensed. Cassian held the shotgun at the ready. I'm going after Ormond. You get in my way, you die. Simple terms. Talk's smile faded. You always were bad at playing nice. I'm done playing. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then Talk stepped back. Fine. You've got a head start. But when this is over, we settle things proper. Cassian nodded once, looking forward to it. The painted dogs melted into the haze, leaving behind the scent of old violence and unfinished debts. Cassian turned to Juniper. You okay? She looked like she wanted to punch something. You didn't mention you had your own fan club. They're not fans, Cassian said. They're reminders. Of what? That even when you try to do the right thing, someone always bleeds. They walked in silence after that, following the canyon that twisted toward the edge of an old facility buried beneath sand and brush. Juniper finally broke the silence. Why do they call you Hound? Cassian didn't answer for a long time. Then, as they crested a rise and saw the broken satellite dish rising from the earth like a dead tree, he said, Because I don't stop chasing, even after the fires burned out. The satellite dish marked the grave of a place too stubborn to die. What remained of the substation it crowned was buried beneath a dune the wind hadn't shifted in years. Most of the structure had collapsed inward, but a rust-worn access hatch still clung to one side of the hill like a mouth waiting to open. Cassian approached first, brushing sand from the rusted wheel lock. Juniper kept watch behind him, eyes scanning the ridgeline for a hint of the painted dogs. The desert was quiet now, but that didn't mean anything. They'd be back, eventually. You sure this is it? She asked. Cassian nodded. Coordinates matched the folder from sundown. Ormond was here. Juniper crouched beside him as he pried the hatch open. The stale air that rushed out was tinged with metal and mold. A scent Cassian knew too well. It was the smell of closed spaces that had held on to death and silence for too long. They descended, one at a time, the metal rungs creaking underfoot. The ladder ended in a narrow corridor, walls lined with dead monitors and wiring like veins split open. A terminal blinked to life as they passed, briefly, then darkened again. This place give you the creeps too? Juniper whispered. Cassian didn't answer. He was already moving, shotgun drawn, flashlight clipped to his shoulder. The corridor widened into a main chamber filled with wreckage. Old data cores shattered against the floor, filing cabinets turned over, their contents scattered and sun-bleached even underground. But what caught his eye was the writing on the far wall. It wasn't paint, it was burn mark. Laser-scorched, precise and deliberate. "I remember what you forgot." Juniper stepped beside him, reading the words aloud in a whisper. "That's supposed to mean something?" Cassian stared at the wall. "It means Ormond's trying to make a point." "What kind of point?" "That we've already met, and he knows I don't remember." Juniper gave him a wary look. "You think he erased you?" "Not just me," Cassian said. "Sundown. The others. If the tech from Vault 49 is real, he's using it." They kept moving, deeper into the compound. Cassian found another terminal in a side room, still warm with residual power. He booted it carefully, fingers dancing across keys like they might detonate. The screen flickered, then loaded a folder. Project Palimpest. V49 Membridge. He clicked open a file. Lines of garbled text scrawled past, corrupted logs and partial audio clips. But one fragment remained intact. Subject 3. Memory overwrite successful. Pre-exposure identity fragmented. Observes new narrative without resistance. Juniper leaned in. "That's not science. That's mind-washing." Cassian didn't respond. His jaw had clenched tight. A second entry followed. Subject 4. Former military. High resistance to overwrite. Supplemental conditioning required. Reassigned as bounty asset. Memory instability noted. He stared at the screen for a long time. Juniper whispered, "That you?" Cassian didn't move. "Maybe." They left the terminal behind, but something in Cassian had shifted. He moved differently now. Not slower, not hesitant, but heavier, like every step was sinking deeper into ground that didn't want to hold him. They reached the lowest level of the substation, where the wall had cracked inward during some ancient quake. Behind it, the exposed bedrock was carved open by metal beams, leading into what looked like a reinforced tunnel. Vault-style architecture. Whatever this place had been, it wasn't built by settlers or scavvers. It was old world, hidden, and funded by something deep-pocketed and dangerous. Juniper's flashlight caught on an emblem barely visible on the steel plating near the tunnel entrance. The Vault-Tech logo, half sanded away. The teeth of the cogwheel faded, but still unmistakable. Cassian touched it, hand lingering. Juniper looked nervous for the first time since they'd met. "And you're sure about going in?" "I'm sure I don't have a choice." They stepped through the passage. The tunnel was long, sloping gently downward, and somewhere in the distance the air began to change. It wasn't colder, it was heavier, like walking into pressure or through the memory of a dream you didn't want to have again. The end of the tunnel opened into what could only be described as a vault annex. It wasn't full-scale, more like a testing wing, a prototype. Cryopods lined the walls, many still intact, condensation fogging their interiors. And in the center of the room, a single chair sat beneath a projection dome. It hummed softly. Cassian stepped forward, past the pods, past the console, until he stood before the chair. He didn't sit. The dome flickered. A face appeared above it, grainy at first, then sharp. Ormond. He looked older than the photos. Grey streaked his hair, and his expression was worn, like he hadn't slept in years. But his eyes still burned with that Vault-Tech gleam, the glint of someone who thought they were saving the world, one experiment at a time. "Cassian Vale," the projection said. "If you're seeing this, I've already won." Juniper moved beside him, wide-eyed. "This is a message?" "It's more than that," Cassian said. "It's a memory trigger." Ormond's voice continued. "I knew you'd come eventually. The conditioning wouldn't hold forever, but I had to try. You were problematic, always asking questions, always trying to protect people not in the parameters. That made you dangerous." Cassian clenched his fists. "You're not who you think you are. You never were. I built the Hound because I needed someone to chase the ghosts I couldn't. And when you started to remember, I buried you." The message ended. Juniper stared at him. "What does that mean?" Cassian's voice was low. "It means I was his creation, a hound, trained to hunt, then made to forget who I was hunting for. He looked around at the cryopods, the hum of the dome, the echo of Ormond's voice still buzzing in the room. I'm going to burn all of it. They left the vault annex before the hum of the projection dome had fully faded. Outside, the wind had changed, dry, sharp-edged, with a scent like scorched metal and ozone. The wasteland always had a way of shifting under your feet, like it knew when something important had been unearthed. Cassian led the way back through the substation, his steps slower now, more deliberate. Juniper didn't press him with questions. She didn't have to. His silence was the kind that followed revelation, the kind that thickened like dust after a collapse. Once outside, the stars had begun to push through the twilight. Cassian pulled a folded map from his coat and spread it across the seat of his bike. Juniper crouched beside him. "There," he said, pointing to a spot beyond sundown. "The glass sea. That's where Ormond's signal was last picked up before he went dark." Juniper frowned. "That place is wrong. I've heard stories. It's not just radioactive. People say it bends time, makes you see things." "They're not wrong," Cassian muttered. "I crossed the edge once. Didn't go far. Still remember the way it felt, like you're walking through someone else's dream." Juniper studied him. "Why would Ormond go there?" Cassian folded the map. "Because no one would follow him." They rode out at dawn, the wind cool, the sky the color of old ash. The bike hummed over cracked roads and long-buried highways, cutting through ghost towns and irradiated valleys. Cassian said little, but Juniper caught him glancing at her more often, like he was comparing the girl beside him to someone he couldn't quite remember. By midday, the glass sea rose in the distance. It looked like a mirage at first, a glittering wave of pale sand and blackened glass dunes stretching for miles, catching the sun in flickers like shattered mirrors. At its edge, the world seemed to fold in on itself, heat shimmer warping the horizon until it resembled the surface of water. Juniper stepped off the bike and walked a few paces forward. "It's beautiful, in a terrifying kind of way." Cassian unslung Bitter Truth and checked the load. "Stay close. Don't listen to anything. If it talks to you, it's not real." Juniper raised an eyebrow. "You've done this before?" "Once," he said. "Didn't go well." They crossed into the glass sea as the sun reached its peak. The moment they passed the first dune, the air changed. It thickened, became humid despite the dry ground. The light dimmed slightly, as if the sun had passed behind a veil, and the reflections began. At first, they were harmless, sunlight catching on a ripple of obsidian sand. But then came the shapes, outlines in the distance, a figure walking just out of reach, a voice whispering a name only Cassian should have known. He kept moving. Juniper saw them too. She spun around once, gun raised, eyes wide. "Cassian, I just saw." "It's not real," he growled. "But it was It's not real." The glass sea was a lie, shaped by radiation and whatever lingering tech Ormond had stirred up out here. Vault Tech had tested things in places like this, experimental reactors, psychic resonance fields, rumors of prototypes that made entire towns forget they existed. Maybe Ormond hadn't just stumbled across the glass sea. Maybe he had been trying to return to it. They reached a ridge after hours of walking, their water half gone and their nerves frayed raw. Beyond it, nestled between dunes that glittered like molten crystal, stood a structure half sunken in glass. Cassian raised his binoculars. It was a lab, Vault-Tech markings heavily reinforced. Power cables extended from a generator buried in the dunes, pulsing with low energy. Outside, a small antenna spun lazily in the breeze, blinking a red signal. Juniper whispered, "He's in there." Cassian nodded, voice low. "No one builds out here unless they plan to vanish." They moved with caution, picking their way down the dune. Halfway there, Juniper froze. "Cassian?" she said softly. "Why do I remember this place?" He turned. "What?" "I've never been here, but I remember this dune, that ridge, that door." Cassian stared at her. "That's not possible." She gripped the side of her head, fingers digging into her temples. "It's like a dream, but clearer. I was here. Juniper, I think I knew Ormond." Cassian's world tilted. "He made you forget. Or maybe I asked him to." Cassian stepped closer. "Why would you?" Then something changed in her face. She went still. Her eyes lost focus. Cassian grabbed her shoulders. Juniper. She blinked. I'm okay. I'm okay. Just something triggered. Maybe the radiation, maybe a memory, but I know this place. Cassian looked to the lab. Then we're closer than I thought. They reached the outer door as the wind picked up, glass dust swirling in wild spirals. The door was locked with a biometric scanner. Cassian stared at it. We'll need a way in. Juniper stepped forward and placed her hand on the pad. The door clicked open. Cassian looked at her stunned. You said you've never been here. She met his eyes. Maybe I lied. The door groaned open, releasing a gust of stagnant air that smelled of ozone, rot, and bleach, the kind of scent that clung to places meant to be forgotten. Cassian raised his shotgun and stepped inside first, sweeping the dark with his flashlight. Juniper followed close behind, hand steady on her pistol but her eyes scanning with more than caution. She was searching for something. The entrance hall had once been polished steel and reinforced glass, but decades of sandblasting and neglect had left the metal pitted and dulled. A cracked Vault Tech poster still clung to one wall, its faded slogan barely readable, "A better future underground." The irony was thick in the air. Cassian moved silently through the outer vestibule, stopping at a central console encrusted with dust. A Vault Tech ID slot blinked red. Juniper stepped forward again without prompting, pulling a card from her satchel, one she hadn't mentioned before, and slid it in. Cassian didn't question her. Not yet. The console chimed and the door to the inner vault shuddered open. Inside, the main atrium of Vault 49 stretched out before them, a skeletal echo of what it had once been. The lighting flickered in sullen pulses, revealing rows of abandoned workstations, cracked cryopods, and walls covered in peeling paint and deep scorch marks. It wasn't just age that had ruined the place, it was violence. Juniper paused at the threshold, staring at the devastation. I remember people screaming. Cassian glanced back. You were here when this happened? I don't know, she said. Maybe I dreamed it. Maybe it's a memory. They moved deeper into the vault. Cassian's boots echoed down sterile corridors that once held order and safety but now whispered only secrets. They passed a mural of smiling families entering the vault beneath a rising mushroom cloud. The faces had been scratched out. At the end of the hall, they found the stasis chamber. There were 6 pods still functioning. 3 were empty. One contained a corpse, mummified by time and chemicals. Another was sealed, but the glass was fogged and opaque. The 6th still glowed faint blue. Juniper stared at the sealed pod. That was my mother's. Cassian looked at her. You're sure? She nodded. Her name was Sarah Ormond. She worked for Vault-Tec, but she wasn't like him. She tried to stop it. Cassian stepped closer. The panel beside the pod displayed a single active line. Subject, Ormond. S. Suspended status. Unknown. Juniper pressed a hand to the glass. I think she locked me out before everything went to hell, put me in a different wing. Maybe Ormond didn't find me until later. Cassian examined the console. There's no record of your pod. Maybe he erased it. Cassian looked at her carefully. You said you knew him. Juniper nodded. He's my father. The words dropped between them like a stone. I didn't remember until we hit the glass sea, she said. It's like that place peeled back a layer. I still don't have everything. Just flashes, a voice, a room with lights. He was talking to me, explaining things, telling me I had to forget for my own good. Cassian absorbed that in silence. He used you. I don't know why. Maybe I volunteered. Maybe he thought it was protecting me. I just know I was here, and then I wasn't. Cassian looked back at the pod. If he's still experimenting, we need to shut it down. They moved on. Past the dorms, past shattered labs with memory wipes scrawled on the walls like graffiti. Clean slate. Truth is a virus. The past is a wound. Juniper paused at each one, fingers trailing the words as if they might speak back. Eventually, they found the heart of the vault, the central lab. It was more intact than the rest, lit by backup generators humming faintly. Consoles glowed with idle energy. Cassian swept the room, then froze at the center. A memory chair stood under a ring of light, its design identical to the one in the substation, but cleaner, sharper. Cables snaked into the floor and walls, feeding into rows of backup servers and a terminal that still ran a real-time log. Juniper stepped up and read the screen aloud. Subject: 8 partial overwrite pending. Queue interrupted. Awaiting operator input. She looked at Cassian. That number, that's me. Cassian's eyes narrowed. Ormond was rewriting you again? She nodded. Or stopping halfway. Maybe he changed his mind. Cassian moved to the terminal and inserted a data spike from his coat. It began pulling logs. Audio, visual, internal notes. Ormond's voice filled the chamber like a ghost returning home. If this works, she'll never remember the vault. Never remember what I did here. She'll be free, clean, a new life. No guilt, no pain. Juniper stood rigid. I did what I had to. The trials failed, the volunteers cracked. Sarah resisted me, and Cassian, he was too dangerous. I had to break him down, make him a myth. The audio crackled. I don't know what I've become, but if she remembers, if they remember, everything falls apart. Cassian stepped back. Juniper stared at the chair. This is where I lost myself, and where we find Ormond, Cassian said. A door behind the lab hissed open. Cold air spilled in, and from the shadows stepped a man. Older, thin, with white hair and eyes like needles. I was hoping you wouldn't make it this far, said Elias Ormond. Cassian raised his shotgun without hesitation. Juniper didn't move, but her eyes locked on the man who stepped into the light. Elias Ormond looked like a man halfway to ash. His lab coat hung loose on a frame thinned by years underground. The white in his hair had overtaken the dark, but the eyes were sharp, calculating. The kind of stare that could slice through a person and leave the pieces standing. You're not going to shoot me, Cassian? Ormond said. Not yet. Cassian's voice was low. I've waited a long time for this. Ormond stepped closer, unarmed. You don't even know what you're angry about. You remember fragments, shadows, but I hold the real story. I remember enough. You turned me into something I wasn't, made me forget. I made you better. Ormond said, spreading his hands. You were a blunt weapon, lost, bleeding. I gave you purpose. You stole my life. I gave you a new one. Juniper stepped forward. And what about me? Ormond's gaze softened, just barely. You were supposed to be safe. You wiped my mind. To save you from this, he swept a hand at the lab, from the horror of what we built here. Your mother died trying to stop me, and I thought I could fix it, make things clean again. You buried the truth, she said, along with everyone who stood in your way. Ormond's shoulders sagged. I know. Cassian didn't lower his weapon. Why? Ormond looked at him. Because we failed. The vault wasn't just about survival. It was about control, memory manipulation, a society engineered from the inside out, and we botched it. The trials drove people mad. Half the staff turned on each other, but I had an insight. If you erase trauma, shape memory, you can create perfect obedience. You created ghosts, Cassian growled. I created you. The words rang in the chamber. I didn't mean to, Ormond said. You were a test case. You volunteered for a bounty hunter project, said you had no family, no ties. You wanted the edge. I gave it to you. You were the perfect tracker until you started remembering the things we buried. Cassian's jaw tightened, and instead of letting me go, you rewrote me. I had to. You were dangerous and effective. Every memory I implanted made you more focused, more ruthless. You became the myth I needed, the Hound. But then Juniper reappeared, and everything unraveled. Juniper's voice cracked. Why didn't you just let us go? Because you don't let weapons walk free, Ormond whispered. Not when they've seen the truth. Silence stretched long. Cassian stepped forward. You've run long enough. Ormond didn't move. You want justice? Shoot me. But it won't undo what's been done. It won't bring back the lives lost to Vault 49. Cassian's finger hovered near the trigger. Then Juniper spoke. No, not like this. Cassian turned slightly. He deserves it. I know, she said, but we don't need revenge. We need truth, and we need to end this the right way. Cassian stared at her. Then slowly he lowered the shotgun. Ormond looked surprised. "You're not going to kill me?" "No," Juniper said. "You are." She pointed to the memory chair. "Sit. Record everything. Tell the Wasteland what you did, then you decide how your story ends." Ormond hesitated. Then, slowly, he walked to the chair and lowered himself into it. Cassian activated the terminal. The screen blinked. Membridge recording initiated. Ormond looked at them. "If I do this, people will come. Voltec remnants, warlords who want to use this tech. They won't stop with me." "They'll find a wreck when they arrive," Cassian said. "The truth, buried under rubble, same as everything else in the wastes." Ormond nodded. He closed his eyes and began to speak. He spoke for an hour. Names, projects, atrocities buried in code and silence. Vault 49 wasn't the only one. There were others, connected. Ormond had known them all. When he finished, he looked at Juniper. "I'm sorry," he said. She didn't reply. Cassian saved the recording, then stepped away. Ormond pulled a small syringe from his coat, a toxin prepared long ago. He didn't ask permission. Injected it quietly. Cassian and Juniper watched him slump in the chair, the last of Vault 49's architects reduced to stillness. They left the vault as the first light of dawn broke across the glass sea. Behind them, the generators began to fail. Lights dimmed. Systems flickered. Juniper walked beside Cassian in silence. "What now?" she asked. "We take the truth to the places that still remember," he said, "and then we vanish." "You think we can?" Cassian looked to the horizon. "No, but we can try." The Hound and the girl with no past disappeared into the sunrise, leaving behind echoes, ruins, and a story too dangerous to forget. They buried Elias Ormond under a dune not far from the shattered vault door, a marker of scavenged rebar pounded into the ground. No name, no epitaph, just silence. Cassian didn't speak during the burial. Juniper did. Made monsters," she said quietly, dropping a small Vault-Tech pin she'd taken from his coat into the hole. "But he made one or two of us too." Cassian shoveled the final layer of sand. "Sometimes monsters forget they were men first. They didn't linger. By midday they were out of the glass sea and back in the bone-dry scrub that led toward the canyon. The wasteland had resumed its rhythm, as if the secrets they uncovered had slipped back beneath its skin. But something had changed in Cassian. His movements were less mechanical now, as if the weight of forgotten years had finally settled into place. Juniper noticed. "You remember anything new?" she asked, walking beside the bike as they coasted downhill. Cassian nodded once. "Flashes. The day I signed up. The conditioning chamber. A name I had before Cassian." She looked up. "You gonna tell me?" "Not yet," he said. "It doesn't feel like mine anymore." They made camp in an old ranger's station half-collapsed near a dried creek bed. The night was cold, the kind that crept into bones and memories. Juniper tended the fire while Cassian pulled a small holotape from his coat, the one containing Ormond's confession. He stared at it for a long time before setting it beside the flame. "We should destroy it," he said. Juniper frowned. "Why? That's proof. People deserve to know." "They won't believe it. Voltec's gone public a dozen times. Each time someone spins it, hides it. This tape isn't justice. It's a map to ruin." She stared into the fire. "So we do nothing. We choose who gets it. Carefully, quietly." She nodded and the silence stretched again, not uncomfortable, just deep. That night Cassian dreamed, not of fire or blood, but of a room filled with light. A young man, himself, but not quite, sat across from a girl no older than 10. Her eyes were sharp, her smile familiar. "You'll forget me," she said in the dream. "I won't. They'll make you. I'll remember anyway." He woke before dawn, breath ragged. Juniper was already up, packing gear. She looked at him and said nothing, but the look in her eyes said she'd seen something too. They set out again, south toward the edge of NCR territory where scattered outposts still clung to order like rusted nails in crumbling walls. By late afternoon they reached a cliffside that overlooked an old broadcasting tower, a place Cassian knew from old maps. He stopped the bike and stared. "What is it?" Juniper asked. "This is where I vanished," he said. "Where Almond took me." The tower was mostly intact, tall, skeletal, with a shack at its base and an antenna array reaching high into the scorched sky. They descended carefully. Inside the shack they found remnants of an old data relay system and a dead console, fried from age or sabotage. Cassian moved with reverence, opening compartments, lifting cables, searching without knowing what for. And then he found it, a locker, sealed with a nameplate scratched nearly bare. He pried it open. Inside was a pre-war recorder and a folder marked Hound Prototype, Project Lazarus. Juniper read over his shoulder. Project Lazarus. Cassian opened the folder. Diagrams, psychological profiles, notes about memory transference, synthetic identity anchors. There was a name on the first page. Michael D. Krell. Juniper blinked. "That's your real name?" Cassian closed the folder. "Was." She studied him. "You gonna start using it?" "No. Cassian Vale is who I became. Carell died in this place. They took the recorder and left the rest." As they climbed the ridge again, a faint rumble echoed from the north. Cassian turned sharply, scanning the horizon. A dust cloud. Juniper raised binoculars. "Vehicles. 6 armored." Cassian nodded grimly. "Torque." The painted dogs were coming. Juniper slung her rifle. "We stand." Cassian looked at her. "No, we make them follow." They kicked up dust as they tore across the plateau, using the map in Cassian's head to loop back toward the canyon basin. It was rough terrain, tight curves, collapsed roads, broken bridges, but it was the kind of place where a predator like him had the advantage. By nightfall, they were miles ahead, hidden in the wreckage of a derailed train. Juniper reloaded quietly. Cassian laid mines. "They think they'll fall for it?" she asked. Cassian checked the detonator. Torque never learned patience. He'll charge, he always does. And, just after midnight, he did. The painted dogs came howling over the ridge, red scarves flying, headlights blazing. They didn't see the mines until the first one went up in a roar of fire and steel. Cassian and Juniper moved fast, taking shots from the high ground. 2 more bikes were disabled, the rest scattered. And through the chaos came Torque. He stood atop a ruined car, gun drawn, scanning the smoke. "Cassian!" he roared. "You always were a coward." Cassian stepped into view. "I'm not running." Torque's grin was blood and spite. "Then let's end this." They charged. Torque didn't hesitate. His boots pounded the cracked rail ties, pistol raised, scarf flapping behind him like a war banner. Cassian advanced to meet him, shotgun held low, waiting for the right angle. Behind them, the night roared with the echoes of fire and the retreat of Torque's scattered pack. They met at the edge of the train car, where the world narrowed to 2 men, and a silence filled only with the pounding of blood. Torque fired first. Cassian ducked low. The bullet clipped the edge of a rusted rail, throwing sparks. Cassian rose with a quick pivot, shotgun to shoulder. Bitter Truth barked once. Torque staggered as pellets tore across his ribs, but he didn't fall. He laughed, wild and breathless. "You lost your edge, Hound." Cassian didn't reply. He advanced, forcing Torque back step by step, each blast driving the old war dog into tighter corners of the ruined train. "You think you're some ghost now?" Torque growled, circling. "Some legend with a cause? You're just like the rest of us, killers dressed up in old regrets." Cassian fired again. Torque dove behind a crate, bleeding now, panting. "That girl with you, she'll leave you like the others. They always do. You're not a protector. You're a weapon, a relic." Cassian moved fast, catching Torque as he rose, knocking the pistol from his hand with a blow to the wrist. The 2 men grappled, fists landing hard, bone against bone, training versus rage. "You don't know who I am," Cassian said, slamming Torque against the metal hull. Torque spat blood. "Neither do you." He jammed a blade from his boot toward Cassian's gut, but Cassian twisted, the knife scraping armor. With a grunt, he brought the butt of the shotgun down on Torque's temple. The man crumpled, stunned, but conscious. Cassian aimed the shotgun at his head. "Do it," Torque hissed. "That's what you're made for." Juniper's voice came from the smoke. "Cassian." He didn't look at her. The shotgun didn't waver. "You don't have to," she said, stepping closer. "He's already done. Let it end." Cassian stared into Torque's eyes, saw the sneer, the defiance, but also the weariness. This wasn't a rival anymore, just a man too broken to know when to stop. Cassian lowered the gun. Talk blinked. You really are gone. No, Cassian said. I'm just not yours anymore. They left Talk alive, tied to a post, with 2 remaining painted dogs tending to their wounded, too afraid to try anything. Cassian and Juniper rode south again, moving fast through low valleys and badland scars, the road ahead blank and wide with possibility. The Wasteland was waking. They passed caravans, traders, NCR scouts, all unaware of the storm that had almost broken above them. And all of them watched the pair go by with curious, cautious glances, like they sensed something old and dangerous in their wake. 2 days later, they reached a fortified settlement near the Colorado, a place called Forge Bend. Cassian knew the local headman, a former Brotherhood scribe turned independent warlord. A dangerous man, but one who owed Cassian favors. Juniper sat by the fire while Cassian met with the man alone. When he returned, he handed her a sealed holotape. The confession. It's going to a memory archive deep in NCR territory. No names, just truth. She took it carefully. You trust him? No, Cassian said, but I trust he's afraid of me. They stayed the night. Juniper found him outside the next morning, staring east. You heading out? She asked. He nodded. I've got places to disappear to. She stood beside him. You could stay. I don't think I'm built for that. You're not the same man Ormond made. I'm still finding out who I am. Juniper looked down. You saved me. You brought me back. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a faded patch, the Vault Tech symbol with a line burned through it. You earned this. He took it and pocketed it without a word. Then he climbed on the bike. Juniper watched as he paused, looked back once, then disappeared down the road into morning haze. She waited long after the dust settled, not because she expected him to return, but because legends always leave echoes. And the Hound? He left deep ones. Cassian didn't ride toward any map-marked settlement or NCR checkpoint. He followed old instincts, scars in the land, whispers from traders, places that had been erased too cleanly. He headed into no man's land, where memory still clung to twisted ruins and people didn't ask questions about who you were before. It took a week to reach the canyon's end, where a collapsed mountain pass hid an old military complex buried in stone. It had no name, just a lock shaped like a vault gear and a radiation signature that kept even scavers away. Cassian stood before the rusted door for a long time. This was where Project Palimpsest had begun. He triggered the access mechanism. The door groaned, then hissed open into shadow and sterile dust. Inside, he found a world untouched since the bombs. The corridors were pristine under layers of silence. Consoles hummed faintly, powered by deep reserves. Signs labeled every hall with clinical precision. Core research, neural bridge, simulacra testing. The place had been built not to shelter life, but to reshape it. Cassian moved through each chamber, weapon lowered but ready. It felt more tomb than lab. There were no bodies, just absence. And beneath it, a hum of power and intent. At the end of a corridor lined with cryo-storage doors, he found the core. A wide chamber with concentric circles of terminals and cables leading into a single raised platform, like a stage built for the end of memory. Above it floated a device shaped like a gyroscope, spinning slowly, lines of blue light tracing old patterns in the air. Cassian approached, breath held. A voice spoke. "Welcome back, Subject Krell." It came from everywhere and nowhere. The AI. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am Echo, original cognitive imprint of Project Palimpsest's oversight system. You are my final active directive." Cassian stared up. What is this place? The core of all recorded identities processed under Palimpsest. You are the final remnant of this cycle. Would you like to access your full memory archive? Cassian hesitated. I'm not him anymore, he said. I'm not Krell. No, Echo replied, but you are incomplete. This device holds your origin, your fracture, and your potential restoration. And if I walk away, you remain as you are, a half-truth. chasing ghosts. Cassian looked at the platform. He saw Juniper's face, the faces of the painted dogs, Ormond's confession, the ruins of Vault 49, and the boy in the memory chair saying, "I'll remember anyway." Cassian stepped onto the platform. The world dissolved. The visions came fast, layered over one another. The boy, Michael Krell, signing contracts, his first kill, his first regret, the night he volunteered, the scream in the chair, Ormond standing over him, "You're my hound now." 100 bounties, 1,000 losses, and finally, Juniper's face in a crowd, a promise, "I'll find you." Cassian gasped as it ended. The platform powered down. He stepped off. Not Krell, not Hound, just a man who finally remembered all of it. Echo's voice returned, softer now. "You are no longer bound by false history." Cassian nodded. "Good." He pulled a plasma charge from his coat and attached it to the console. "You were part of the sickness." "Understood," Echo said. "Goodbye, Cassian." The charge blew the core to ash. Cassian left the mountain as the collapse began behind him, sealing the truth under rock and fire. Cassian rode east through a wasteland that looked no different on the surface, but he saw it with new eyes. The memories hadn't changed the terrain or the people, but they changed him. He remembered now, not just the conditioning or the rewrites, but the cracks in between, the places where his true self had tried to break through, where he had protected instead of obeyed, where he had chosen mercy when violence would have been easier. Those were the moments that proved he had never fully belonged to Ormond. He'd been haunted by a version of himself, forged in another man's image, but beneath it all, he had always been his own. By the time he reached the town of Calvert's Drop, the sun was low. It was a quiet outpost built around a hydro pump station and a crumbling roadside diner. NCR flags fluttered weakly from half poles, and a handful of guards in salvaged armor stood watch without much enthusiasm. The town had the look of a place holding together with stubborn hope, just enough grit to survive, but not enough to rise. Cassian dismounted slowly, stretching his back and scanning the plaza. He wasn't here to hide. He was here to deliver something. Juniper had told him of a contact, an archivist named Del Rey, operating out of the Drop under NCR's sanction, tasked with collecting testimonies of Vault Tech crimes and tech remnants for a project called the Historical Integrity Accord. Most considered it a bureaucratic fantasy, but Cassian saw a purpose in it. If anyone could hold the truth without twisting it, it was someone no one else believed in. He found Del Rey in the back of the diner, nursing a cup of something hot and bitter. The man looked like he'd once been part of something official. Trim beard, glasses held together with wire, a worn NCR badge still pinned to his satchel. He looked up as Cassian approached. "You the courier Juniper mentioned?" he asked, eyes sharp. Cassian nodded and sat across from him. "I've got something. You won't want to open it in public." Del Rey's brows rose, but he didn't argue. He accepted the holotape quietly and slipped it into a lead-lined case. "You know what's on it?" Cassian met his gaze. "Everything. Vault 49, Project Palimpsest, the identity manipulation trials, Ormond's confession." Del Rey went still. "That's not just history. That's dynamite." "That's truth," Cassian said. "Do with it what you will, but don't let it vanish." Del Rey nodded slowly. "You want credit for this?" Cassian shook his head. "I want silence." He stood and left the diner without looking back. That night, Cassian camped alone outside town, beneath a sky choked with stars. He built no fire. He needed no warmth. What he needed was time, to sift through the weight of memory, to make sense of the fragments now whole. The wind whispered through the brush, carrying with it no orders, no names, just the sound of a man finally at peace with who he was. Somewhere, he knew Juniper was walking her own road. She had family to uncover, truths to follow. Maybe she'd find Vault survivors. Maybe she'd build something new from the ruins. Either way, she had earned her future. Cassian didn't dream that night, and when the sun rose, he wasn't the Hound anymore. He was just a man, walking forward through the wasteland, unburdened. News travels slow through the wasteland, often warped by the time it arrives, but some stories cling to their shape. In the weeks that followed Cassian's disappearance from Calvert's Drop, a whisper began to spread, not from holotapes or terminals, but in the hushed exchanges of travelers at campfires, in the notes etched into walls of rest stops, in the wary admiration of caravan guards. The Hound was real, and he had walked into Vault 49 and come out changed. The NCR dismissed the stories as myth. Their scribes flagged the claims as unverified, rumors laced with post-war exaggeration. But some within the Historical Integrity Accord began to take them seriously, especially after Del Rey delivered a sealed report marked Echo Protocol. It vanished into confidential channels, but its implications bled out anyway. A directive to shut down forgotten vaults quietly circulated. Field teams began cross-referencing old Vault-Tec coordinates. Something had shaken loose, and though the surface seemed calm, the routes were shifting. In a rusted enclave far to the east, a Brotherhood outpost picked up fragments of Ormon's recordings on a pirate frequency, encrypted, degraded, but there. Palimpsest, simulacra, memory burn thresholds. The Elder sent a recon unit into Arizona, without explanation. Back in the Mojave, Juniper walked alone beneath the twin moons of old satellites, her rifle slung across her back and a purpose growing in her eyes. She'd spent days decoding what Cassian had left with her, a fragment of a memory matrix he hadn't destroyed, not Ormon's, hers. It held a message from her mother, not a recording, but a neural imprint, a last safeguard embedded in the data, hidden beneath false memories. Junie, if you find this, I didn't want you to carry what I couldn't fix. I begged him to shut it down. I begged him to let you live your life. He said he'd do it. I didn't know he'd use you instead. Her mother's voice broke, and then the message ended. Juniper carried that voice with her now. It was her compass, louder than her doubts, clearer than the silence left by Vault 49. She would find the others, the children who had been part of the trials, survivors like her, forgotten names waiting to be remembered. There were more. She felt it in her bones. And somewhere out beyond the cities and the ruins, out past the reach of the NCR and the failed machines, there were others telling stories. Of a man in a bone-colored duster who didn't kill unless he had to, who walked like he had nowhere to be but always found the right place, who burned a vault to ash but left its secrets behind. The Hound had become a legend, but he wasn't chasing ghosts anymore. He was making sure they stayed buried. One evening, Juniper camped in the shadow of a ruined pre-war tower, the air dry and quiet. A scavenger passing by shared her fire. He wore mismatched armor and a hopeful grin. "You hear the one about the bounty hunter who outlived his own reputation?" he asked, roasting something unrecognizable on a skewer. Juniper smiled faintly. "Maybe. What's the punchline?" "Walked away," the man said. "Just like that. Dropped off the edge of the wastes. Some say he went east. Others think he's buried under a new name, waiting for something worse to show up." Juniper poked the fire, her eyes thoughtful. "What do you think?" the man asked. "I think some legends earn their rest," she said. "But the ones that matter, they don't really stop. They just change shape." The scavenger chuckled. "Well, I hope he's still out there. World feels meaner without someone like that in it." Juniper looked to the stars, the fire's glow painting her face in shades of memory and promise. "He's out there," she said softly, "just not the way we remember." Cassian stood at the edge of a valley blackened by old fire, a windless bowl of cracked stone and sunken wreckage. Beyond it lay the ruins of Echo Canyon, a place once marked on no maps where Vault-Tec had tested one of its earliest memory sync protocols. It had failed catastrophically, turning every test subject against themselves. Recorded history showed only corrupted data and a total communication blackout. He had come not for revenge, but to erase what remained. There were still systems running here, scattered nodes left behind by Ormon's predecessors. If anyone else found them, the cycle could start again. Someone, somewhere, would try to harness identity like a tool, to forge obedience out of people's minds. Cassian wouldn't let them. He passed through shattered fence lines, his boots sinking into powdery dirt. The scent of burned plastic and scorched wires lingered after decades, as if the canyon itself had never stopped smoldering. Structures emerged like skeletal arms, bunkers torn open by time, towers leaning at impossible angles. Inside one of the collapsed bunkers, he found the central uplink terminal. It was dormant at first, but a flick of a switch brought power humming back to life, lights blinking feebly like eyes long blind. He moved through the interface slowly, methodically. The protocols were old, their coding brittle with neglect, but the root directory still held live feeds to outlying memory caches. Cassian loaded a virus, a custom fragment Echo had gifted him before its own destruction. It was simple: seek, overwrite, collapse. The AI had called it Mercy. Cassian activated it and stood back. One by one, the systems went dark. Monitors bled static, data cords blinked out. What had once been the foundation for Palimpsest's birth now ended in silence. He left the bunker and walked until the canyon opened wide behind him. At a high ridge, he turned and looked back. This was where he had been broken, where Michael Krell was first fragmented and the Hound began. This place had shaped the myth, not with glory, but with absence. Now it was just a grave. Cassian removed a strip of his duster and tied it to a cracked antenna pole, a marker, not for memory but for warning. Let anyone who passed through here wonder what had stood and fallen. Let the silence do the talking. He descended the ridge with the sun at his back, no longer chasing something, no longer fleeing. He had done what needed to be done. The tech was gone. The ghosts were quieter. At the base of the canyon, a trader's caravan waited where he'd arranged the meeting. 2 Brahmin, a grizzled merchant named Lareth, and a silent guard. Cassian handed over a package, an encoded memory key holding the last archive from Vault 49. It was to be buried in a memory vault far from NCR hands. Lareth didn't ask questions. He didn't want to know. He only nodded and loaded the package into a sealed crate marked scrap metal. Cassian gave him a brief salute and turned away. "Where are you heading now?" Lareth called. Cassian didn't stop. "Wherever the road forgets me." He walked for an hour, then another. The desert stretched before him, endless and uncaring, and still it felt lighter than it had in years. Weeks passed. Cassian walked roads that didn't appear on maps, followed canyons etched with bones and forgotten boots, slept in the hollows of old machines that once promised the world. The wasteland didn't change, but he did. His steps grew steadier, less haunted. He didn't hide his face anymore. There was no need. Those who knew him by the old name had either buried it or feared it. In the hills north of Durango Crater, he came across a farming commune built atop the ruins of an old pre-war clinic. The people there eyed him cautiously at first, rifles ready behind rusted fences, but hunger softened most doubts. Cassian helped them patch a water purifier with scavenged copper, fixed a turbine using stripped enclave capacitors. He said little, offered no name. The children watched him most. One, a girl with tangled hair and bright eyes, asked if he'd fought Deathclaws. He said yes. Another asked if he'd ever lost. He said yes to that too. They didn't press for more. That was the way of the Wastes. You didn't need the whole story, just enough to believe someone had one. They offered him shelter, a bunk in a half-built silo, meals made from Brahmin root, and the kind of kindness people only give to ghosts they don't realize are real. He stayed longer than he meant to. 3 days, then a week. No one asked him to stay. No one asked him to leave. He belonged in the space between. On the 8th morning, Juniper arrived. She didn't knock. She didn't need to. Cassian was on the silo roof, watching sunrise claw through the haze. She climbed up beside him, dropped her satchel with a thud. She'd changed. More dust on her coat, more certainty in her posture, but her eyes hadn't. "You left without saying goodbye," she said. "I wasn't sure I was done being me," he replied. "Well, that's stupid," she said, sitting. "You don't get to decide when you're finished. People like us just keep becoming." Her voice was soft but certain, like it had been waiting for this conversation since he left. They sat in silence, the wasteland sprawling around them. "Found 3 more," Juniper said eventually. From Vault 49, living under false names. 2 remembered, 1 didn't. I'm helping her rebuild. Cassian nodded. Good. There wasn't much more to say. Some truths didn't need to be repeated. You still think you're done? She asked. I think I don't need to chase anymore, he said. Then stay. Help. We're starting something out east. New territory. No old flags. Just soil and seeds. Cassian looked at the horizon. I don't belong in the light. You're not the light, she said. But you make it safer. He thought about it a while. Thought about Ormond, about the vault, about a younger version of himself who thought purpose had to be forged in fire. Maybe I'll come with you, he said. For a while. That's all we ever have, she answered. There was no promise in her voice, just understanding. Together they walked down from the roof, down from the myth, and toward a future written not in fear or fire, but in choice. The Hound was done. Cassian Vale remained. And somewhere beyond the cracked roads and burnt-out dreams, something new waited to be made.